So I'm just going to go through a quick demonstration of ways to discern between different soil textures out in the field. So before that, I know he may have mentioned the sponge. I don't know if he did anything with it, but I think it's a good example of a way to visualize or a soil matrix, I guess. So if you could imagine this as your soil after a rain or irrigation event, water will fill the pore spaces between your soil particles like it'll fill this sponge. So then if you squeeze it out, that'll be your loss due to infiltration or evaporation or evapotranspiration if you have plants growing in the soil. So this would be called the wilting point. At this point, the water that's in the soil is not available to the plants. Everything that was available, I just squeezed out of the sponge. So it's just I think a good thing to keep in mind that soil is analogous to this sponge where you have these particles of different sizes all sort of crammed together, and the water will move in between those particles, and depending on the sizes of those, the water will move slower or faster through the soil. So a good way to visualize it, if you have like 2-liter bottles lying around, you can cut them, and what we did was we just drilled holes in the bottom of the caps there, so you could do that, or get a nail and a hammer and punch holes in it. So here we have 3 different soils. This is what you would call a sandy loam. It's actually found on campus in a lot of areas. So we took that and we added a really coarse sand to it. So we'll add some here to... This second soil is a sandy loam, which has more fine particles than what a more sandy soil would. And then this last soil, it's actually found on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. It has more finer textured particles, so this will be our clay soil for this demonstration.
In southern Afghanistan, what type of soils do you think you'll generally find? Since it's very similar to the San Joaquin Valley, where you have the high mountains and then you have what we call the plains and valleys.
Clay?
The clay, yeah. And what would be one indicator, even if you didn't have, let's say, this kind of activity? What do you think might be an indicator of that?
Structure when it's wet?
Very good. Well, structure is it.
Crack.
If you look at because Afghans basically make stuff out of their native materials, right, primarily. So what we saw the Kishmish Khana, we saw these villages that Charles showed us today. What were those made out of? Adobe or clay, right? So they're taking that from the local environment. So if you're not even sure what kind, you just look around the buildings that people have in villages and you can pretty much determine. Just like the soils are a bit more sandy in the riverbeds on the eastern side, so I think they build their houses more out of stone in that area. It's just a kind of a little...
So a lack of clay houses indicates that clay's not the local
Yeah,
soil.
the clay is probably not there.
Yeah, that's good. So then for this, we'll just add water to each, and we can observe the infiltration. I just marked this so to make sure we add the same amount each time. So yeah, if you get down, you can observe that it's already begun infiltrating through the sand, and you see it's moving faster in the sandy loam, and it'll take quite a bit more time for it to reach the bottom for the clay.
So what might that indicate to you? If it takes a long time, if the soil is holding the water longer and it's taking longer time to drip through, that would probably mean
You'd have to water more often.
No more, more water
less
for the
often.
plants.
Yeah, the one that's draining through more, the sandy, would mean that you're going to have to water more often.
Less water, but more frequently.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas the clay retains its water, so you have to do it less frequently and perhaps put more.
So this is a good method because if you have something clear, you can sort of see it, visualize how it would move in the field. But another method, I guess, as you guys hinted at, is to observe it when it's wet and holding the soil and feeling the difference is can be really effective. So we'll do what we call the ribbon test, where you wet the soil and try to roll it into a ribbon or some kind of shape. So you'll see that each of these soils will hold its structure differently because of the size of the particles. So let's add some. So you can see that this, if you try to roll it out, it's not gonna hold its structure very well. You can also, if you make a ball and try to throw it, it might fall apart. This isn't at all. Pass it around so if anyone's interested can feel so. And even in cases where you have very coarse soil, I mean, here you can see the difference between you can see large grains. We'll try this one next.
Like we're always talking about sand, I was saying to Paul Sandhurst in the UK, which is where the Army Military Academy is. Sand, it refers to the type of soil that is locally, and Hurst is Old English for forest. It's a very foresty, sandy area, so the type of soil can actually lead to the name of towns.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So,
White sand.
okay, here's the sandy loam.
And that we expect this to have a bit more structure.
Oh, yes. We can try this one.
Yeah.
Making mud piles.
Yeah, my hands are probably too wet, but if you want, you can try to roll it. So you can feel the difference between those two. That's kind of like Play-Doh. That's because the sizes of the particles are much smaller, so it maintains a tighter structure.
Of those three soil types, the ideal soil type you would want would be the middle one, presumably, in terms of
something.
It would allow the water to flow through, but at the same time it would retain.
Yeah, ideally, something that facilitates some infiltration would work well. I mean, depending on the root zone of your crop, you want some infiltration, but generally a sandier soil would be. You'd have to adjust your management practices. Could be a bit more difficult to.
And can the composition of soils vary in a very short space of time? Literally within 500 meters, a kilometer?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. We have another field, I guess, north of here, and just it's a 20-acre field, and we encounter all of those things: sand, silt, and clay structures. So yeah, they can be heterogeneous in a very small area. Your soil. So yeah, if you can, it's always good to keep or just look at what you have, and if you can sort of feel it out and know what to look for, it's helpful.
With the salinity of soil, I heard something like you can ruin someone's garden by salting the earth. Is there anything you can do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Depending on the salts, I guess, as well. Like if it's or I guess something or like a sodium would be, that actually too much of that hinders the soil's ability to form structures. So if you apply water, irrigate, it can seal up, and then you won't have infiltration in those cases. And for example, what they do here, if you have a lot of sodium, they'll add something like gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, because the soil particles, they'll bind to those calcium ions and form a more stable structure that allows water to flow through more effectively. So salinity has a big impact on soil structure and the ability of water to move through. So if you have the tools to know or analyze the soil in that way, then that's always incredibly helpful. But I'm not sure if you will have access. I'm sorry.
Is there anything you can do to mitigate the effects? Or is it just like you just don't plant there?
Well, if it's like a fine texture, or if you have trouble breaking through, I guess you could manually disturb the soil somehow or break it up to promote infiltration. But I guess generally you're kind of stuck with whatever's there. But again, because soils can vary in short spaces, if you do have an area that would be more conducive to growing properly, then
How would soil compaction affect the absorption? So like if you had the sand but it had been like tamped down, that would I assume would...
like if something was maybe driving over that area, yes, generally compaction can hinder infiltration, make it more difficult. So if possible, you'd like to avoid areas that are disturbed in that way.